Let's move on to Ireland topic 3. So if you don't do Ireland topic 3, feel free to zone out at this point. We've got the opening important 6 minutes done. So the case study that we're going to look at today, the last of the 3 case studies, because remember, Eucharistic Congress, I'd spend this fair amount of time on the Eucharistic Congress. The one that comes up every year for Ireland topic 3, and 2, the Pope died, conclave coming up very soon, Catholicism is in the news. Wouldn't surprise me if they put it on yet again. But one thing that does come up, but not as obviously as the Eucharistic Congress, is this next case study, which is called Belfast and World War II. That's the name of it. It's a bit of a strange one, because the exam doesn't necessarily ask you questions that says, tell me about Belfast during World War II. They ask it in weird ways. So this is what I'm going to show to you in terms of some of the previous exam questions. I'm going to read out some of them from previous years. So in 2024, the question came up a little bit strangely. It says, during the years 1920 to 1945, which does encompass World War II, how well did the government of Northern Ireland deal with the social and economic problems and or threats to security? This is threats to security. So it doesn't mention Belfast, doesn't mention World War II, but it is part of the question. The only thing is, you need to know a bit more. It's similar to the kind of Ireland topic 5 questions, with the way that they encompass the case studies, where it's tell me about this and that. So that's one way. In 2023, again, the question came up similarly to how it came up previously. It says, during the period 20 to 45, how well did the government of Northern Ireland respond to the challenges it faced? So the challenge it faced was World War II. How well did it respond to that challenge? So again, the case study isn't being mentioned explicitly. You're going to have to read between the lines to find where that question is. The next one then, the deferred paper from 2023, for the people who weren't able to sit the paper in June. The question was, during the period 20 to 45, how effectively did the government of Northern Ireland manage the economy or threats to security to the state? Threats to security to the state, that again is, World War II. If we go back to 2022, I know I'm kind of rushing through this, but just again, bear with me. By the way, Eucharistic Congress comes up again. How did the Unionist Party in power respond to the challenges it faced from 20 to 45? So this time Northern Ireland isn't even mentioned. It's just Unionist Party. So you need to know, well, the Unionist Party, that means Northern Ireland, that's Lord Brookborough. That's fine. I know where it's coming in here. So it's up to you to figure that out. That's James Craig. That's going to be World War II. You're going to need to focus on that. A lot of these questions about Northern Ireland are starting at 2020. Sorry, 1920, apologies. Starting at 1920. So they don't want the Solemn League and Covenant up as far as, they're looking for kind of Northern Ireland becoming a state in 1920. Government of Ireland Act. That's what they're looking for as their starting point, right the way up to about 45, even though the course runs to 49. But again, the 45 thing is kind of a bit of a clue as to what they want. Whereas, the deferred paper in 2022 asked a kind of slightly different question. It says, which government, Dublin or Belfast, faced the greater challenges during World War II? So that's an emergency question as well as a Belfast question, because you're asked 2 questions there. It says, which government faced greater challenges? Did Northern Ireland face greater challenges because it was involved in the war? Or did the Irish Free State face a bigger challenge because it was neutral during the war and the difficulties it faced? And it's asking you to compare. If you get a question like that, please don't go, here's all of Northern Ireland for 3 paragraphs, followed by here's all of Ireland for 3 paragraphs. I think for flow and for your overall evaluation mark, especially, and linking up your points and paragraphs, I think it's best to go, Free State, Northern Ireland, Free State, Northern Ireland, go back and forth between them. I think I'll give you a better answer. You can probably tell I haven't mentioned Belfast once. What was the impact? So from 2021, what was the impact of World War II on Ireland North and South? It's an interesting question because it's asking you pretty much about the links between both of them. So we could say, oh, the impact on the North was this and the impact on the South was that. So again, you're noticing the links between both. We're going back as far as 2021, and we've included 2 deferred papers in that. So we're looking at the guts of about 5 papers now at this point. Not once have I mentioned the word Belfast, because Belfast hasn't been in any of the questions. The next question, it says, so in 2020, the question didn't come up. So again, that's maybe an example of how it hasn't come up yet. Again, in 2019, we're looking at it again. No. So, it says, what was the impact on Northern Ireland of the world economic crisis of the interwar years and or World War II? So again, that's a world economic crisis question. So, but then it says and or World War II. So you could talk about both the impact of, let's say, the Great Depression and the economic decline during those years, but as well as World War II. So you're bringing in Belfast during World War II. So I've talked about this enough that I'm hoping that you're going to listen to me here, whereas you will probably not see the word Belfast in the question. You're more likely to see World War II as part of the question. You're more likely to see the years 1920 to 1945 in the question. You're likely to see Northern Ireland in the question. You're likely to see Unionists, or I could spell it right, Unionists in the question. You're more likely to see all of these things rather than just seeing Belfast. The other thing I'd say is you need to be clued in for other parts of the question as well to be able to fully answer what is, coming up for you. So now that we have that in our minds, we can get stuck into the question as it is, or the section as it is, and we can focus then on these key terms, because I'm a big fan of understanding your key terms and knowing your key terms. If you know your key terms, well then you're going to be able to utilize them better in an answer. Key terms are important. It's something that we did when we looked at the sample answers during the Easter course. When you are able to include key terms and explain what they are and talk about their importance, instead of just talking in vague generalities, you're going to get more marks. So the first thing is World War II. I think we all know what World War II is, 1939 to 1945. Belfast is affected quite in a very interesting way during this, and I'm going to talk about that as we go along, because a lot of times when we look at World War II, we're talking about, let's say, the Blitz, we're talking about Blitzkrieg, we're talking about France. We kind of nearly forget that Belfast is part of the UK, that Belfast is included in the war, because we look at it from an Irish perspective, from the Irish Free State perspective, who are following a neutrality policy. And we can kind of say, we kind of get bogged down in that a little bit, especially when we're talking about the emergency. But on the other hand, Northern Ireland is a state that is part of the UK. It is involved in the war right from the very start. It is bombed heavily on a number of occasions during the Blitz. It is an important kind of sea outpost. It's it has a lot of important ports for getting in things, part of the convoy from in the Battle of the Atlantic, about getting ships across. It is an important aspect of the war, and it's something that can be left behind a little bit, which brings us into the idea of the Union. The Union is the United Kingdom. It is the union between Northern Ireland, Scotland, and England and Wales, linking those crowns. This is something that we've talked about at length, and it's something that the people of Northern Ireland, especially the Protestants of Northern Ireland, are really heavily leaning into during this time. We have the treaty. The treaty becomes an issue as part of this because, mainly because of the treaty ports. As part of the treaty, there were 3 ports that were set aside on the coast of Ireland, and mainly on the west coast and the southern coast of Ireland, that the British Navy got to keep for fear of another Atlantic war, similar to the one during World War I. What's interesting is, Ireland got them back as part of the kind of the economic treaty that was signed after the economic war. De Valera made a deal, takes them off Chamberlain. Who would have thought that a year or so later that to be very important? Well, the British should have known, because it's not as if, war came out of nowhere in 1939. And then when they asked for them back, absolutely no, says De Valera. Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe is the German Air Force. They're going to fight against the RAF, the Royal Air Force. Some they see as RAAF, it's the same idea. We're going to talk a little bit about the planes that were used. You would have known this previously when you kind of there's one of the online on-demand lessons where I talk about the technology of warfare during World War II. I recommend having a look at that if you're looking for just a heads up as to what's going on. But we're going to be talking German Stuka dive bombers supported by Messerschmitts up against British planes, especially Hurricanes and Spitfires. That's pretty much how it works. Don't need to know too much else about it. This question is more the impact. This isn't going to be a technology of war question. If you spend half of a paragraph or a full paragraph talking about the technology of warcraft and warfare, you've kind of missed the point in a question like this. Like, you might have lots of facts and lots of analysis, but is a focus on the question? Probably not. Northern Ireland as a whole was affected, but this question is specifically asks about Belfast, or this case study will specifically ask about Belfast and the impact on Belfast. You're going to have to talk about the effect on the people of Belfast. What's really interesting is that if you are bombed from above by the German Luftwaffe, everything is affected. Whether you're rich or whether you're poor, it makes absolutely no difference. You could be from the rich part of town or the poor part of town. When they start dropping bombs on houses, it's indiscriminate. That's the issue that people will have, especially the moral issues afterwards when people start talking about modern warfare. You see it today with kind of aerial bombardment. If you look at, let's say, an Israeli aerial bombardment of a Gazan hospital or school, and you say, well, we hit some, we killed some Hamas terrorists, but you killed 15 other civilians. Well, then these are the questions that people were asking back then. It would be a war crime if somebody went in and shot them dead, but is it different if you're bombing from above? So these are all questions we're going to have to, that you will have to think about, especially if you just like to study history at a later date or study ethics or something like that in philosophy. There's a guy I like to listen to. I don't know if you ever heard of him, a guy called Dan Carlin. He has a podcast called Hardcore History. He has a really interesting podcast about what he calls logical insanity. The idea that the causing of more damage will shorten the war. The killing of more people now will shorten the war and mean that there'll be less killing done over a longer period of time. These are all things that are going through people's heads at this point. The Germans are thinking, if we bomb the British to oblivion, will that shorten the war? Will that mean that we get to win? So these are all questions that's really interesting. We think about the effect on the people, and especially on the British psyche. The idea of keep calm and carry on. That's them. Keep calm and carry on. We're getting bombed, but, British stiff upper lip. Let's not give in. No surrender. The bombs that are going to be dropped, two different kinds of bombs. There's the explosive bombs, and you also have incendiary bombs. Incendiary bombs are things that are like set fires. Doesn't really work too well on British cities, and I'll include Belfast as a British city. Simply because of the materials that the houses are made from. If you bomb a Japanese city or a German city, a lot of them are made from wood. So the idea of whipping up a firestorm is a lot easier, and you can cause massive amounts of casualties. It's not necessarily the bombs that kill them, it's the firestorms that happen afterwards. Hard to do it because of the concrete builds and the brick builds in kind of British towns and cities. There is a huge amount of destruction, but again, not as much as what would happen in other cities. But again, we'll talk about that as we get there. The Free State Fire Brigade becomes really interesting because in an act that definitely breaks Irish neutrality, the Free State sends fire brigades up to the north to help with the rescue operations and to putting out the fires after one particular Blitz attack. The newspapers is really interesting how each side of the kind of sectarian divide up the north will deal with this event separately about how they discuss this event, which I think is really interesting. And lastly, we'll look at some of the eyewitnesses who were there to tell the story of what happened. So let's jump in. The impact of the outbreak of World War II in the north and in the south of Ireland. So, apologies. So, the first thing is, Britain declares war on Germany in September 1939. And we've gone at this ad nauseum. I'm not going to talk about the outbreak of war again, but that's all you need to know. And one thing you need to know is Northern Ireland, and therefore Belfast, is a part of Britain. Well, not part of Britain, it's part of the United Kingdom. Well, let's call them Britain for the sake of it. If you look at the Olympics, it's Team GB. So Northern Ireland sees this as an opportunity. Similar enough to how the people of Northern Ireland saw World War I as an opportunity to show loyalty to the Union. World War II is similar to that. It's also really interesting that there's some people in the south, in the Irish Free State, who also join up, but not out of loyalty. They join up because it was a job. Ireland's economy still not in a really meaningfully good position in the 1940s, especially after the economic war under De Valera in the 1930s. So for the people of Northern Ireland, it's more of a loyalty, ethical thing that they would join up. People of the Free State, they look at this slightly differently. 38,000 men from Northern Ireland joined the army, even though there's no conscription. Conscription is when you are called up. Okay, so you're just, you're called up, you have no say in the matter. To have 38,000 men join up pretty much immediately is a fair sign of the popularity of the cause. But in the Irish Free State, World War II doesn't exist, which I think it's still something that blows my mind. I still think it's really, it's not a head in the sand moment. It's more like, it's like elephant in the room, that you know what's happening, but you don't address it. We have the emergency because De Valera it's voted in the Dáil. Emergency powers. The Emergency Powers Act is passed. He is given the power to, not rule by decree, but to bypass the Dáil on some occasions, to be able to get things passed more quickly. And this isn't abnormal. This is something that would happen in kind of emergency conditions, which is what this is. But still, there's 43,000 men that sign up from Éire and the Irish Free State, Sorstad and Heron, three interchangeable terms for the one thing. It's the Ireland that we live in today, just under a different kind of name. It doesn't become Ireland, by the way. Republic of Ireland is a soccer team. Ireland is the name of the country that we live in. That doesn't come until the late 1940s, until after the war. Sign up for the British Army during the war. Again, reasons for that are simple. It's not loyalty. I'm not talking in generalities. Some of them might have felt that, but like more specifically, it was like food, money, send it back to their families. It's a way of life. Plus, it's a pension as well. So again, if you die, your family gets a pension. Again, if you survive, your family gets a pension. You get the pension then later on. So it was a steady wage as well. So it's a positive thing for these people to risk themselves to do this. The Irish Free State distanced themselves from the UK. Now, this is important that you really need to consider this by staying neutral. Now, what does neutrality mean? Like, there's still questions about Irish neutrality today and about how Ireland sees itself. Let's think about this for a second. One of the things that Ireland has going for itself in today's world is that we are a neutral country, that we don't have an aggressive army, we don't invade places, we don't attack places, we never have. What we are is seen as a peacekeeping force that's somewhere in the middle between two sides, and that we need to skirt that boundary. Now, there's an issue here, especially a moral issue. Nazis are bad. That should not be a controversial statement because it's not. Nazis are bad. So, as a history teacher, I have to skirt that idea of, well, let's look at it from both sides. Let's try to be empathetical towards Nazis. Why would somebody become a Nazi? How are some people brainwashed? But as a person, I can say, no, Nazis are bad. So let's jump back into this idea of being neutral. how can you stay neutral when you know what the Nazis are doing? How can you stand to the side and say, well, the Nazis are taking over most of Western Europe, and they are rounding up Jews, they are treating the prisoners of war really badly, and then it gets into the mid-42, 43, and you get stories coming back from the final solution, and you're going, wow, this is really bad. Like, how can you stay neutral in that situation? At which point do you go, actually, I think it's morally obligated of us to get involved? Or is it? If you're Ireland at this point, you are trying to assert your independence. You are looking at it from from two kind of standpoints. Like, yeah, you're looking at it from an independence point. So you are saying we are an independent nation, that we run ourselves, and we are not part of the UK. We're not going to row in the UK simply because the UK told us to. We're going to assert that independence and show that we are neutral. We will stay out of it. At the same time, it is an example of power or powerless. What could Ireland do in this war? Like, think about it for a second. What could we contribute? We have a tiny air force, tiny navy, tiny army that is underfunded and ill-equipped. What could we do apart from anger the Germans? It would make Ireland a target. It would make Ireland, or the Free State, should I say, it would make us somewhere easy to bomb and ill-equipped to defend itself. And why would the British send over, let's say, defensive kind of anti-aircraft, defences to Ireland when they're going to look after themselves? It doesn't make sense in De Valera's mind to join, because what could you do? Ireland as a tiny nation, weak nation, what could it actually do? And what it also does is it turns you into a target in terms of not just to be bombed, but to be invaded as well. There's precedence to the idea that Ireland is a backdoor into England. The French had tried it, the Spanish had tried it, the weather ruined it on all those occasions for each of those people. Each of those nations in the past. But it does make Ireland a target then for, let's say, German attacks. So you can see why De Valera would choose this path. You can agree or disagree with it. It's completely up to yourself. Are you going to go with the moral, or are you going to go with the practical? Completely up to you. So Northern Ireland is angered by this. This lack of support, especially with the treaty ports, because of the fact that they were handed back as part of the deal that De Valera had made with Chamberlain to end the economic war. But the fact that they weren't given back so that the British could use them, again, because of independence, and again, because of the idea of the powerlessness Ireland would be to actually defend this situation. You can again see De Valera's point, but you can also see the British point of, well, we need them, to which De Valera would say, you shouldn't have given them away so. So for the first 2 years of the war, relations between Northern Ireland and the Free State were strained. And you can completely understand why relations between these two nations would be strained over something like this. So let's jump into the case study itself of Belfast during World War II. And the first thing that we're going to discuss is the Blitz in Belfast in 1941. So let's just the small but important, distinction between Blitz and Blitzkrieg. So Blitzkrieg is a German kind of Wehrmacht attack. It is done over 3 steps. You have the attack from the air, followed by the attack on the ground with tanks to break up the kind of enemy lines, followed by the infantry mop up. It's that 3-step attack that is so successful in the early stages of the war. That's Blitzkrieg. Then we have the Battle of Britain. And the Battle of Britain is the German attacks on the especially coastal fortifications in southern island of Britain, southern England. Basically to try to soften up England for a Nazi invasion. That's different. That's the Battle of Britain. The British win that, the Germans lose, and now we're on to a different thing altogether, which is the Blitz. The Blitz is a German aerial bombardment of British towns and cities in the hope of breaking British morale, so them breaking the morale of the British people. You need to understand the differences between those things because they are not the same, even though they might sound the same or they are happening around the same time. It's not the same. You need to know the distinctions and the reasons why each ones were, let's say, unsuccessful or successful, as it may be. So, initially, Belfast thought that they weren't going to be bombed. And there's a reason for this. At the start of the war, they draw lines. I'm going to draw a terrible map of Europe here. I apologise if I so we've Ireland. Beside Ireland, we have Britain. And beside Britain, we have, let's say, France and Holland. And then, obviously, we have Denmark here. And then we have Norway. And again, apologies for these terrible, terrible graphs. But if we look at Germany, let's say Germany is here, right? So we need to think about how far a German aeroplane can fly. So you need to fly to here if you want to bomb London. And then what you also need to do is turn around and fly home. Because here is the German border. Again, terrible maps, I apologise. And that could be the limit. I'd say the limit would probably be about here. So again, we're talking like that radius there. That radius there will get you the likes of Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle. You might get up as far as Edinburgh and Glasgow. You might get that far. But over here, we have Belfast. And as you can see, Belfast seems to be just out of range of what the German Air Force are able to do. So if we go, and by the way, throwing in names like I'm about to do here, of Edmund Warnock, like what a name. Like if you're able to throw that in, you look really intelligent. Edmund Warnock is a junior minister in Northern Ireland. And he writes that Belfast was so far away from German airfields that it wouldn't be economical to strike there. So you need to think again about air attacks at that time. If you want to fly farther, you have to carry a lesser load because the more load you have, the more fuel you need to use to travel there. So could a German plane get to Belfast and back? Probably, yeah. But the problem is, what would be the point if it couldn't carry bombs to get there? So again, you're into a difficult situation of, okay, we can get there, but we can't bomb, so therefore we can't get back. So it's not economical to strike there. And the other thing that you need to think about, right, is if I fly, let me jump into this. If I fly across Britain here and go all the way across to here, I am a target all the way across Britain. What I really want to do, okay, if I want to be safe, and again, I apologise for all the lines. Sure, we'll pick a different colour just to make life a little bit easier, right? What I can do is, if I want to be safer, we'll throw green just to be different. So I'll fly across, and then I will go up the Irish Sea, and then attack from the side. That way, I can't be hit by anti-aircraft fire. Because getting hit by anti-aircraft fire, it's only really going to happen if you're flying over land. So again, if they want to bomb Belfast, they'd have to fly in a straight line over Britain and not carrying that many bombs. That's a problem. So what changes everything? What changes everything, if you are living in Belfast, obviously, is the capture of France. Makes it easier to fly to Belfast. It makes it shorter to fly to Belfast. It makes it safer to fly to Belfast. Because, a big yellow this time, I'm now flying from, no, I don't want that one, apologies. This is the one I'm looking for, big yellow. So now I'm flying from here. I'm flying from somewhere in France. I can now fly out, I can now fly right up, I can now bomb, and I can get right the way back again. And it's a lot easier to do because this distance between here and here now doesn't exist. I'm hoping that that diagram made sense. So, Defenses are very poor because of this. Because if you're looking for like aerial defenses, you need a lot of anti-aircraft guns. The way that anti-aircraft guns work is that you fire a lot of rounds of ammunition up into the sky. Every, whatever many bullets is what's called a tracer bullet. So the bullet is covered in phosphorus. So when it heats up in flight, it shines. So the gunner is able to track where they're firing. You have large searchlights that are shone up into the sky to try to catch where the German bombers are, so you can kind of follow them along. With only 8, you can't defend a city as big as Belfast with 8 anti-aircraft guns. Like, there's cities in England with like double, triple that. That would be better. The other thing is there's no subway. This is going to be important. Like, for example, if you lived in Britain at this time, you hear the air raid siren, where you go? You go to your local subway station. If you are in London, you go down into the underground, down into the tube, and you are pretty much safe. Some of the German cities, again, if we're looking to talk about how horrific war is, some of the German cities, they thought that they were safe when they went into the underground, maybe not realising the fact that because their city is made of wood, you get a firestorm, and people basically like baked to death, cooked in these kind of underground things because the temperature rose so high. You didn't have to worry about that if you were in London. Just the conditions weren't there to do that. But again, if you're in Belfast, you don't have that protection. So you have, number one, the fact that Edmund Warnock thinks, no, we're not going to be attacked. Number two, because of that, you don't have enough anti-aircraft guns. And number three, you don't have enough kind of underground protection. I know in Britain they were telling people to build the likes of Anderson huts, which are, you dig 2 meters down into your garden and you put a corrugated roof on top of it. And in fairness, that, unless it's a direct hit, something that hits that hut directly, you're going to be pretty much safe from most attacks. So they can do that, but again, it's, not everyone's going to be able to do that. The first attack happens on the 7th of April, 1941, but it's only brief and small scale. It's almost like a precursor to something bigger that will happen later on. And that does happen. There's a guy called Lord Haw Haw. You might have heard of him. He had a huge scar on his face, if you've ever seen the pictures of him. He's a British guy who is a Nazi. He is a fascist, and he lives in Germany, and he supports the German regime. And what he was able to do is have a radio station, and they would fire this radio station in on shortwave radio that they could travel quite a long distance into Britain so people could listen to this German propaganda. And what he would do is he would frighten the people where he was, that were going to be attacked. He let people know in these cities, oh yes, I expect an attack today, but he say it in a kind of weird way. Like, for example, he told the people of Belfast, he warned of an attack around Easter because he says, we're going to bring you Easter eggs. Now, Lord Haw Haw, after the war, was executed for his role as a German, as a fascist. So, things didn't work out well for him in the end. But what we can see here is the use of terror tactics, which I think is something that we kind of associate with kind of modern world. We think of, terror and terrorists and striking terror in the heart of the enemy and things like that. This is an example of this back then. You would have had places as well where propaganda flyers would be dropped as well as an example of kind of terror tactics. So the real attack happens on the 15th of April when 180 planes drop bombs over a 5-hour period. That's a lot of planes, and it goes on for a long time, pretty much unobstructed because of the lack of defences. Which means that the Germans can be pretty accurate. Now, as accurate as you can be at this kind of style of warfare, and when I'm teaching this to my students, what I say is, okay, imagine you're standing on the roof of the school and you have an egg in your hand, and there's a target that's a 2 meters by 2 meters, big circle target, as if you're doing archery, 2 meters wide, that's directly below the roof of the school. And all you have to do is hold the egg out and then drop the egg. That's all you have to do is hold the egg out, drop the egg, and do you think you could get near the center of that target? And the students go, probably, okay, yeah, maybe you would. And then I said, okay, I want you to imagine running full steam as fast as you can across the roof of the school with your arm outstretched with the egg in your hand, and just when you think you're above that target, to let go of the egg. How accurate do you think you'd be? And again, now you're going, I don't know if you're full sure. Now it's like, okay, imagine you're on a motorbike traveling down a ramp on the school as fast as you can. Because remember, stuck dive bombers, they start high, and then they drop low, they drop their bombs, and they come back up again. So you have that. Like, imagine you're on a motorbike on a ramp, and just as you get to the bottom of the ramp, you have to drop this. And they go, well, I don't think I'll be very good. And it's like, okay, imagine people shooting at you now when you're doing that. And like, this is the difficulty. And there's no GPS, there's no guides. And then you have to say, right, it's a windy day. So if the wind's in your face, do you wait till you're past your target before you drop it? If the wind's at your tail, do you drop it before you hit your target? How many bombs do you have? Like, all of these questions have to go through the minds of these bombers as they're doing this. So again, to be accurate at this stage is really difficult to be able to do. Anyway, let's jump back in and we say, well, there's two types of bombs. The high-impact explosives as well as incendiaries were dropped. There's cases or there's tales of people standing on roofs with sweeping brushes, sweeping the incendiaries off the roof so they didn't catch fire. Because you're able to do that when your roofs are made of slate and tile, and the buildings themselves are made of brick.